Time is now 7 o'clock. The Cicero Town Council meeting is now in session. If you could all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing. Ms. Gary.
Would you bow with me? Thank you, Father. Thank you for this day, this place we have together, all the people that are so concerned about our town. Father, thank you for always showing us grace, love, and mercy. Father, I pray that you be with the council today and help them make good decisions for the town of Cicero. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. You can all be seated. Ms. Gary, if you could please take roll.
I can. Joseph Cox.
Present.
Eric Hayden.
Present.
Dennis Johnson.
Present.
Jacob Everett.
Present.
Emily Pearson.
Present.
We have a quorum with all members present. All right. Has everybody had a chance to look over the agenda? Any additions or amendments? I do my there it is.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Motion is second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We have an agenda. Moving on to the approval of the prior minutes. Has everybody had a chance to look those over? Awesome.
Yes.
I'll make a motion to approve the town council retreat minutes for March 3rd, 2026, for the town council meeting minutes of March 3rd, and for the town council executive session meeting minutes for March 5th.
I'll second that. Dennis Johnson.
Motion is second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Good there. Moving on to the approval of claims dated 3/17. Has everybody had an opportunity to look those over, and are there any questions?
Those did include the Reynolds
The
pay application number 20.
Do we want to do that here in Keith's section?
You want to do it?
We usually do it in Keith's section.
Good enough.
So for pay application 20 is up? I thought we didn't approve it last time, but, okay. Yes, please add those.
Okay.
That just happens under Keith's discussion topic anyway. It's
Good
fine.
enough.
Make a motion to approve the claims of 3/17/26.
I'll second.
Motion is second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Please pay the bills, Rhonda.
Thank you.
Moving on to council committee reports. I have nothing for EDC. Emily, do we even need to have this on here anymore? Okay. Oh, wait, never mind. That's the story.
gone.
Where's Bruce?
He's here.
Keith, move your head.
Oh, there you go.
Good evening, Council. Stormwater has nothing new to bring to you, otherwise we're waiting for the next couple of weeks. I think we'll start our project during most of it. I think Keith will give us an update on it, but that's about all I got for you right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to legal counsel report. Mr. Cole?
Nothing at this time.
Good. Cicero Jackson Township Plan Commission report. Mr. Zawadzki is not here. Mr. Strong, do you have anything there?
No, sir.
All right. Do you have anything under special projects?
No, sir.
All right. Thank you very much. Moving along to the town engineer report, Mr. Bryant.
Good evening, all.
Good evening.
Wastewater, Reynolds continues on the wastewater plant. They're still working on oxidation ditch rehab. They're working on clarifier rehab. They did start up the return sludge, waste sludge structure, doing a lot of piping moving forward. And then we talked a little bit ago, AF 20 was submitted previously. We just sent in the recommendations, and we would recommend paying for the contract. I've got the dollar amount.
I have
He
it.
has it here.
I have it. So I'll make a motion to, I reviewed it in more detail from last meeting. I'll make a motion to approve paying pay application 20 and the total amount of $522,812.12, split between Reynolds and retainage.
I'll second. Dennis Johnson.
Motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Good to go.
The 2024 community crossings, which is the West Jackson Street project, we did have our substantial completion inspection. I emailed on the 4th of March the punch list and the substantial completion form. If you guys are acceptable, we would like to have a motion to go sign a substantial completion form tonight after the meeting, so we can document that. All that does is start the warranty period for the contract.
Now, you're good with everything?
Yeah.
Okay.
They've got a few things that are buttoning up, but most of them are weather related. If we just put snow in for some reason.
Understood.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Dan.
So a question down by Jimmy's and just that block, both sides. Are the handicap spots, so I see one blue line?
They were not supposed to paint, that's in the punch list too, but
Okay.
that was supposed to be a white line. It was
Okay.
not supposed to be a blue line. So
Okay,
they're gonna correct that.
okay.
And they also are gonna correct, if you noticed, some of the handicap, the blue ones that were supposed to be blue are failing. I believe they put them down when it was too cold, so they're gonna redo some of those as well, so.
Okay, thank you. So do we need to wait for that activity to be completed, or do we have enough retainage to cover that?
No, not for this action, because it's substantially complete. They did it, they just got to do it, so now it's more of a warning and it's on the punch list. But before we release the retainage, all that'll be done.
Okay.
So you want us to make a motion to authorize Joe to sign?
Substantial completion.
And is that a letter we're sending to NDOT?
No.
This is for the contractor?
This is just for the contractor. It's part of the construction contract
Okay.
to set that milestone that they're substantially complete.
Okay. Anybody have a problem with that?
No.
Make a motion to authorize Joe to sign the letter as requested.
I'll second.
Motion and second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? I'll get it done.
And I do have copies of those if we need them tonight. To 2026 CCMG, that's the East Jackson project that bid. All the post-bid information was sent to NDOT. Rhonda's got feedback from NDOT that everything looks good, and they've sent it on to the State Board of Accounts, or no, that's not, IFA is who they sent it to, Indiana Finance Authority. So right now, we're just waiting to get the money deposited in our account before we issue the notice to proceed to the contractor.
Gotcha.
So everything's been approved and ready to go. The only thing I would ask, if you would consider it, is if you do a motion to allow Joe to sign that notice to proceed once we have the funds in place. That might save a week or two delay for the contractor, if that's acceptable.
So I'll make a motion to approve Joe signing a motion to proceed for the 2026 CCMG East Jackson project once money has been deposited into our account.
A second, Dennis Johnson.
Motion and second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Then the Morse Lennon Drive under drain project, as Bruce mentioned, the stormwater board project, that was awarded. We did get bonds and insurance and certificates acceptable from them, so now we're looking at just trying to schedule a pre-construction meeting, which is they want to start mobilizing and start doing the work in April, so you got an email in your inbox, Bruce, to look at some dates when you get a chance, and we'll set that meeting. Sure. Assuming you want to be there. I mean, if you can, it'd be great. So that's just a quick update on that, and we'll keep you posted.
Thank you.
That's all I had. Any other questions?
What about a water task order?
Did you want to? Okay.
Did we say we weren't going to do that?
We talked about it about 10 minutes ago. We're going to hold off till the next meeting.
Okay.
Oh.
Fine doing it now.
Keith, I had a question. CCMG 2026, when do you think we'll see construction activity on that?
Really, it depends on when we get money, but
Okay.
they say they're ready to start within a couple weeks and they're starting to submit shop drawings, so we're reviewing. Hopefully by the time we get the money, we'll have all the materials reviewed and shop drawings, and they said they start in 2 or 3 weeks. But if I recall correctly, Rhonda, they thought that would be deposited in like 35 days is what I remember in that email, and that's probably been 10 days ago, so we're probably looking sometime 25 days. Hopefully we get the money and they'll start 4 to 6 weeks, something like
Okay,
that.
thank you.
But obviously, as soon as we know, we'll let you know. And we'll have a pre-construction meeting for that as well, once we have money, can start construction. So I had any other questions? Or?
Any other questions for Mr. Bryant?
None.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving along to old business. Battery energy storage system ordinance number 03-17-2026-01. Aaron, do you need to?
Yes, if I may. Before we get started on the different presentations tonight, I wanted to address a matter that came up yesterday. As some people are aware, there was a discussion online indicating that some people believed one of our council members had a conflict of interest. related to his personal business, which is called Corsa Strategies, and is engaged in site selection, aiding companies and businesses trying to find sites. I've discussed this matter with Mr. Everett, who is the individual in question, and as a point of clarification, he disclosed that his business, Corsa Strategies, is in the process of closing down and is not taking on new clients. He now works for DMA Incorporated, which is a Fort Wayne-based firm that provides guidance on tax-related matters, and Mr. Everett assists clients with site selection and seeking incentives. In light of that, I have analyzed the allegation of a conflict of interest on those facts. Per Indiana Code 36-7-4-1016 F2 and 3, the Plan Commission and the Town Council's consideration of a zoning ordinance is considered a legislative act. And this is considered a lawmaking act because ordinances are laws, and so that's what's happening when they're considering a law. The conflict of interest requirements for legislative acts are set forth under 36-7-4-223B. This is a conflict of interest standard that applies to legislative decisions before the Plan Commission or the Town Council. Quote, a member of a Plan Commission or a legislative body is disqualified and may not participate as a member of the Plan Commission or legislative body in a hearing or recommendation of that commission or body concerning a legislative act which the member has a direct or indirect financial interest. A direct or indirect financial interest in the item before the board is obviously the key term here. A direct financial interest means the individual is one of the parties or the owner of the entity involved, or that the individual has a pecuniary or financial interest in the contract, the transaction, or the project being considered. An indirect financial interest refers to a situation where the individual has an ownership interest through an intermediary, such as a family member, or another business that is a holding company, or a trust, or an estate. It can also mean an interest in a contract or transaction or project that is not held directly by the individual, but by a family member or an entity involved in the transaction. Indiana's courts have previously been asked to interpret how this applies. And there's a case called Perryworth Concerned Citizens v. the Board of Commissioners of Boone County. In that case, the Indiana Court of Appeals heard an allegation that a Boone County commissioner should have disqualified himself from voting on a zoning ordinance because his wife was a partial owner of a property in the immediate vicinity of that parcel, and the development brought on by that rezoning ordinance, which included extending utilities to the area, were arguably going to increase the value of his wife's property. The parties that were challenging the commission's vote said that the term conflict of interest must be broadly construed, and they contended that any interest would undermine the public confidence in the zoning process should be considered disqualifying. The Indiana Court of Appeals disagreed. It held that the key to determining whether a conflict exists was the specific zoning matter before the board. In that case, it was the petition to rezone a specific piece of real estate, as it was the only item the board was deciding, and not the status of land in the area. The court said, quote, that the county commissioner is not statutorily disqualified because he had no interest, direct or indirect, in the zoning matter. The term zoning matter in the statute does not include property in the vicinity of property being rezoned. Had the General Assembly intended to disqualify legislators who own land near subject properties, it could have stated so. As it did not, there is no basis for interpreting the plain words of the statute under such situations. Using this legal standard to apply to the proposed nickel plate reliability project, a direct or an indirect financial interest means that Mr. Everett, his business, employer, his family, or a trust or legal entity owned by them would have an ownership interest or be receiving some benefits in connection with this petition, or have a contract or agreement with the petitioner, being IPA or Blackstone as a owner of IPA, or the property's owners. Mr. Everett affirmed that neither he, his business, his employer, nor his family represent IPA, Blackstone, the Nickel Plate Reliability Project, or the property owners Ronald and Don Coverdale in this matter or in any capacity. He also verified that they do not have any direct or indirect financial interest in these entities, the property, or the project. And that's correct, Mr. Everett?
That is correct.
Sorry, I don't understand.
This means that Mr. Everett does not have a direct or indirect financial interest under Indiana law. That being said, I want to note that Mr. Everett has gone further than this requirement and stated that neither he, his business, nor a member of his family have ever represented, worked for, contracted with, or had any financial interest in any of these entities, and that to the best of his knowledge, his employer hasn't either. In fact, neither Mr. Everett nor his family or family members have ever worked for a BEST company or on a BEST project. Is that correct, Mr. Everett?
That is correct.
As Mr. Everett does not have a direct or indirect financial interest in this matter as defined by the applicable law, he does not have a conflict of interest. The mere fact that he works in a related field and has knowledge about this type of project does not amount to a conflict absent any financial interest in the matter. Finally, please note that under Indiana law, individuals acting in a lawmaking capacity, as town council members are when they consider an ordinance, are permitted to take positions on how they will vote and what types of projects, laws, and activities they will support or oppose. They can do this in advance of laws being proposed. They can do this outside of session. For example, members of Congress and the Indiana General Assembly, including candidates for those offices, routinely state how they would vote in certain situations and if they were considering certain subject matter. The same is true for town council members. When they are serving in a lawmaking capacity, such as considering the zoning ordinance,
Sorry.
they are free to state in advance what type of projects they would support or oppose, what sort of conditions they believe need to be attached to projects, and they are free to utilize their personal experience, whatever it may be, and their background to help inform these decisions. Thus, if a town council is considering an ordinance addressing something that a member has knowledge about, that council member is free to share their perspective and to vote accordingly. Thus, Mr. Everett does not have a conflict of interest, nor is he required to recuse himself. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Cole. Moving along, as most of you in the audience know, we took the step of going out to further our due diligence, and we contracted with a number of different professional expert firms to get their expert opinions on the topic, and this includes environmental, human impact, financial, and basically details for the ordinance. So at this time, what we're going to do is open up the floor for those firms so they can present their findings of fact. And we just ask that you respect their time and let them get their presentation done. And as questions come up, we'll try to address those. Who do we want to start with there?
Yes, thanks. The first presentation is from August Mack and Dan Zebikowski. August Mack is an environmental consulting firm. As the name would suggest, we brought them in and asked them to look into the environmental impact and safety issues that would be associated with a project like this. Part of their research involved, they did review the comments that were made at the public hearing, and they looked into some of the matters that were raised there, as well as any others that came up during the review process. Mr. Zebikowski, would you like to commence?
Do you have anything you need to put on the screen?
Not really.
Okay.
I could just work through this, that's fine.
That's fine. If you could, just make sure you're speaking into the microphone.
Okay.
Our audio's not as great here
No
as
problem.
it is at our other facility.
Okay, so my name is Dave Zebikowski. So I'm a geologist with August Mack Environmental, and my company, we've been around, August Mack's been around about 35 years. We're the largest local environmental consulting company. We do everything from air permits, water, Superfund sites, hazardous waste sites, et cetera, et cetera. So that's been our bread and butter. I've been in 28 years in the business. I'm a licensed professional geologist in Indiana and a few other states. My principal roles have really been cleanup of contaminated sites, from underground storage tanks, Superfund sites, large industrial properties, et cetera, et cetera. Also involved in siting of various projects and businesses, doing environmental site assessments and things of that matter. So I have expertise in this matter particularly. So I was asked by the council to basically review environmental issues that could potentially be associated with the battery energy storage system, the BESS. So I went through the process of evaluating all the available information. So IPA already had some studies done, and some of the classic ones of phase 1 environmental site assessment were done, some critical analyses. There's 4 or 5 existing documents that are already performed. So review those, and then also go back and look at EPA recommendations, look at National Fire Protection Association recommendations, look at Indiana Department of Environmental Management, EPA, other Indiana Department of Homeland Security, and what their requirements are, just to gather more information. Provided information requests too, to gather information from IPA on some specific things, which they were cooperative with, just to understand the nature of some of the other documents that they would have to do in the future, and get some example documents. Also looked at the public comments and concerns. We reviewed those, which some of those are the same that maybe council had and that we had too. And then finally, start thinking through what the required and future documents would be. Obviously, there's a lot of work to do in these projects, and there's going to be additional steps that are going to have to be done and additional analyses that would have to get done. So, overview of the project, I don't think I need to go through that. I think most folks understand what that is at this point in time, so I don't want to waste any time with that. So from our perspective, we looked at the due diligence and project siting documentation that was provided. That was done by a consultant of theirs. It was not us. So we were truly an independent third party reviewing these. So for the phase 1 environmental site assessment, what you look for is recognized environmental conditions. And these would be conditions that would indicate that you have a potential issue at the site. So, and that could be from spills, staining, equipment storage, whatever that might be. Sometimes the back 40 issues where you might have drums or containers, even on farm fields, we see them all the time, where you have issues with old equipment or drums of old pesticide or herbicide. It's a pretty common thing. So that's what the phase 1, the purpose of that is. And then there was no, excuse me, there was no recognized environmental conditions identified in that report. We concurred, we agree with that finding as well. There was one data gap identified, and a data gap is where you just don't have information available, and apparently they did reach out, IPA or their consultant reached out to Marathon to get a little more information on pipeline between in the 30s to the 60s. There's a data gap there. I'm not sure if that was ever filled, but that's not really a very consequential data gap in my opinion. So no concerns there. Critical issues analysis is another document that's performed. Critical issues analysis is really cultural resources. Are there archaeological sites or in the vicinity of the property? Are there cemeteries, pioneer cemeteries, whatever? They look at threats to biological or water resources, and also sensitive, threatened, endangered species. That's a standard kind of report as well. And the findings from that we agree with, and there really were no cultural resources or biological resources of concern. Another document that was done was a drainage report, another third party for them. The drainage report really looks at wetlands, floodplains. Are they in a floodplain? Again, this is all siting type stuff. And there was no wetlands identified. It's not within a floodplain at all. And then in that document, they also did calculations to determine what kind of stormwater storage they would have to have. So that was part of that as well. And then lastly, wetland delineation, identify if there's any wetlands on site. There was one agricultural swale on the northeast portion of the property, and that's all that was identified. And then from that perspective, you want to see if there's any jurisdictional waters that require Corps of Engineer permits. The Army Corps of Engineer really manages any jurisdictional waters, and there's permitting processes, and that would not come into play with something like this, an agricultural swale. So based on the review of those 4 documents, we didn't see any aberrations, any concerns in terms of the quality, and it meets the standard for how we would do those reports ourselves. So Now to the questions. So there was several questions that were raised previously regarding fire prevention, mitigation. That was one of the questions. First thing is the technology they're using is state-of-the-art technology. The LFP battery is the best one that's out there in terms of thermal control. Anybody that has a backup battery system in their house, they're pretty cool, by the way. A lot of times they attach to solar as well, if you ever have power outages or whatever. And those are all lithium iron phosphate as well. They work really well. I can just say that firsthand. So they don't have the thermal issues that the older battery technologies have had, which can result in potential fires. So I think there's some significant advantages there. They don't use the heavy metals and the rare earth metals that are required for the older battery systems. So the proposal is the state-of-the-art battery. It would also be outdoor container spacing, which would eliminate the potential for any kind of gas buildup, or if there was any kind of fire or conflagration, it would eliminate that because it's not enclosed. They are spaced apart and they're outdoors. My understanding is, and this is questions that we had for IPA, and that is, the suppliers are using the type of batteries, and it sounds like they're using Tier 1 suppliers, which are the best out there. They all have various ratings in terms of the enclosure and making sure that they're enclosed to the elements and everything, so you don't have any issues with that. They have robust monitoring, prevent thermal runaway. That was one of the questions I had too, just to understand how do they monitor the system. And they've got internal monitoring for the entire system. They can identify if there's any gases, if there's any elevated temperatures, any of those things. That's all built into their battery management system. So, and lastly, and probably most importantly, they would have to do a fire and emergency response plan. That's a big one. It would ultimately have to be approved by the Department of Homeland Security, some other folks as well. That's a pretty important document, and that's one that really you have to follow the NFPA guidance on that. So that's one that would have to be done still. It has not been done yet. That would be in a later phase of the project. That is reviewed annually, and my understanding is that IPA or any other BESS contractor, they normally would work with the local fire agencies on training specific for those units. So, and it sounds like there will be annual training and initial training, so local firefighters understand how to manage any issue. And again, in my opinion, I wouldn't expect any fires necessarily with this technology. It's a newer technology, and it's not generally been a major concern. I just threw this on here. This is from the Electric Power Research Institute. This is on EPA's website, and it talks about the failure incidents and where they are right now. And now the failure incidents are, they've gone like this, while the amount of battery storage has gone up this way. So in the last 4 or 5 years particularly, the technology has improved significantly. So that's really less and less of a concern, which is good. And I am a Hamilton County resident too. I live here, so that's a real thing, the fire threat. The other thing, surface water and groundwater contamination, we reviewed that. And from our perspective, the operation itself wouldn't necessarily result in any kind of impacts, but it comes down to that odd chance that there's a fire or some other issue where you could have a release to surface water. Surface water on that parcel drains to the east through some swales, ultimately to the White River a couple miles away, does not drain towards Morse. So there's a divide right there, and it flows to the east. The design would have an integrated pond, so with a gate valve. So that's a smart move, and a lot of industrial facilities have that for precaution. So they're following kind of a best engineered practice for that. And then realistically, the area doesn't have a major flood risk or anything. So bottom line, from a surface water contamination, no significant risk to surface water. Potential for groundwater contamination, I spent a lot of time in my career looking at groundwater contamination, putting in a lot of wells and trying to clean up groundwater. This area, the site itself, is located in the area that's got very thick clay soils. Anybody who's dug a hole out here knows that. We've got 50 to 80 feet of clay with just thin sand zones. That clay does not allow contaminants to go down. So the site operations itself they don't really store any chemicals or contaminants. It's just the batteries. That's my understanding, and from all the research I've done as well. So you wouldn't necessarily have a concern with anything getting into the soil or groundwater unless there was a catastrophic condition. If there was, you're situated on very, very tight clay. And you have a groundwater. The groundwater is all at depth. There's no shallow groundwater. If it is, it's just perched. It's not used for drinking water. The drinking water here is, if anybody's got wells, it's typically between 80 and 100 feet in sand and gravel units that are overlain by 50 to 80 feet of clay or more. So in terms of potential for groundwater contamination, I think it's very, very insignificant if there was a fire or anything like that. Very little potential. And a lot of it's just because of the nature of the soils and the deep nature of the aquifer itself. Water well records too, we reviewed water well records in the area. So within a half mile of the proposed facility, there's 4 drinking water wells. The drinking water wells are at a depth of 100 feet or greater. The screens are typically 3 to 5 feet. So that's the screen zone, and then there's 80 feet of clay, and they're filled with concrete around the outside to prevent any kind of migration. So that's a pretty robust design. Should not result in any kind of impacts at all if there was, again, a catastrophic incident. Potential ambient air contamination, that was a concern. We reached out to IPA to ask if they've done any measurements or monitoring to see if there's any gases that are emitted during normal operations. The answer is no. So during normal operations of these, there's nothing emitted in the atmosphere. I didn't expect that based on the research I've done and based on our knowledge base. In the event of a fire, CO2, obviously if you burn something, CO2 is one of the byproducts that would be there. CO2 is heavier than air. However, CO2 also wouldn't accumulate in a fire situation like that unless you had an enclosed area. So these are all outdoor. You'd have carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide, CH4, which is methane, and you'd have hydrogen also emitted potentially. Again, those would all be within that little distance right around any area that's burning. So we wouldn't expect any concerns if there was, again, the rare chance that there could be a fire. I wouldn't expect that it would result in any kind of major gas plume or anything like that.
So is that typical with a battery? So like a battery catching fire?
Yeah, every now and then you hear about a cell phone, right, that decides to overcharge or heat up. And these are a different technology. This is not lithium iron phosphate. This has the technology that's more the metals technology, so it's nickel and things like that. So these have a tendency to overheat. That's why a lot of these larger applications now, they're using this different technology. So the lithium ion technology or the lithium iron phosphate technology has a much lower thermal potential for thermal runaway. So that's why it's being used more and more, because it just doesn't heat up the way these kind of batteries do.
But if there is a fire,
Yes.
the off gas is what you talked about?
Correct.
Nothing else really contaminating or contamination, correct?
Yeah, there would be minor amounts of probably PAH compounds and things like that, and that's just things that from every fire. When you burn wood, you have the same kind of PAHs that are some of our carcinogenic compounds. That's what makes barbecued meat taste good. It's those PAHs. So that's actually in a regular fire. So you'd have some of those things in there because there are, there's various metal pieces and there's copper and whatever in there. So if there was a major fire, you'd have some residual there, but it'd be no different than almost any building or manufacturing building, realistically. So.
And if I understood what you were saying correctly, basically what you were talking about the plume of smoke, it's not in a concentration where it could travel and be of any real detriment, right?
At least not for those compounds. I wouldn't expect it. No, and there would be monitoring right away anyway. If there was that, one of the first things they'd do for their emergency response plan and fire plan would be to do upstream, downstream monitoring, perimeter monitoring to make sure that nobody would be harmed because of for obvious reasons, right? One of the other things was the adjacent Marathon pipeline. That was a potential concern. If that was going to, if the pipeline had any impact potentially at all. It's our understanding that the pipeline folks are aware that this potentially could be a project. They didn't have any concerns with that. That's our understanding. The batteries would be 100 feet or more away from the pipeline area. Pipelines are built very robust to handle earthquakes, flooding, whatever. That's how they build the pipelines for a good reason. You don't hear about too many major pipeline incidents, and there's pipelines crisscrossing all over Indiana and the country. They're built very robust. These will be set away from them, shouldn't have any impact. Lastly, it was really battery disposal and decommissioning. That was some of the concerns I think folks had. And that was a question we had too. You know, these things are typically 20 years of service life. That's the expectation. These would be a US EPA universal waste. So they essentially go in for recovery, recycling. So they try to get the materials out of there. It wouldn't go off as a hazardous waste. At this time, the EPA has not identified those as hazardous waste. Batteries go off as universal. They would be required also to have a decommissioning plan in place, and that's a really big deal because you don't want them doing this and getting up and walking away and leaving this. So a requirement that has to be done is a decommissioning plan. There's usually dollars set aside for that decommissioning plan. That decommissioning plan would say that when you're done with operations in 20 years, 25 years, whatever it may be, you can't just get up and leave. You need to remove all batteries, transformers, electrical equipment, everything. So pretty much bring it back. So we looked at example plans that they had from other projects, and those meet a standard that I would say would be reasonable.
So that would include any site remediation to return it to its
That's correct.
original state? Okay.
Yep. So overall, guys, our conclusion is, in our opinion, reviewing the materials that we had, the nickel plate reliability project does not pose a significant threat to human health and the environment. And IPA is following the appropriate protocols for these types of projects. So that is all I have.
From a risk
Any
standpoint, is there any other type of installation that you could compare it to? From a risk standpoint, I already said that, I guess.
You know, we do think about underground storage tanks. All of us here have tanks in the back of our cars, right, that have 15, 20 gallons of highly toxic, known carcinogenic compounds are in their benzene, highly flammable. We get that from gas stations. Gas stations have 10,000-gallon tanks that are from here to the corner over there, and they're about 8 feet around. And those are buried at depth. Those are more of a concern to me than something like this. And I'll tell you right now, my cleanup, half of our sites are underground storage tank related or industrial facilities where they put stuff on the back 40 that they shouldn't have. So I think this is relatively low risk in terms of the types of projects that we see.
Any questions? Any questions from the audience? Yeah.
Yes,
When
ma'am.
the batteries reach their lifespan, can they be replaced? Or
Yes.
they wouldn't abandon the whole site, they would just remove one and put a new one in to keep the whole site going?
That's correct. That's my understanding. That's normally how these would operate. So if they manage every single container. It's got its own system, and it understands if there's one part that's not working well, then they can deactivate that part and then replace it.
Okay.
So that wouldn't just get kicked off to the side. It would go go through the whole process of waste, universal waste.
Because you mentioned
recycling.
abandoning the site, and I
Yeah.
would think they would want to.
No, this what happens, we have seen sites where basically they have an operation and then they just go home. So you've got tanks, you've got other stuff just sitting there, and they claim bankruptcy and they walk away. That really can't happen if you have some financial assurance or some other things out there. These type of projects generally have financial assurance to prevent that from happening. I'm not saying
And
that
that's
would happen.
what we're working on with
Yeah.
the decommissioning plan that has funding behind it.
Yep. Yeah, almost every corrective action and Superfund site that we work on has some form of financial assurance to make sure that the responsible party does not have.
And David, that's an
Yes.
element of the ordinance as well. There's a financial assurance requirement as well, which we'll talk about later.
Very good.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes,
You
ma'am.
had stated that there wasn't a risk of contaminating the soil because our soil is so hard with clay.
Mhm.
If that is true, then why do we already have a contaminated site here in Cicero with our soil?
Yeah, well, if you have a release on the surface, and if that gets cleaned up relatively promptly, it doesn't have time to go into groundwater and migrate. And anytime you have an emergency response situation like this, that gets cleaned up quickly. Years ago, a lot of the sites, and most of the sites that I deal with, to be honest with you, ma'am, are 40 to 80 years old. And I wouldn't be surprised if the site you're talking about is probably 40 to 80 years old when they did not manage waste well, and they just didn't operate well.
They didn't know to.
Well, sometimes they knew better, but they still, this is my experience. So a lot of the issues that you see around, if there is issues around town, it's not from a release that happened yesterday. It's literally from things 40 or 50 years ago. One of the sites I'm working on is literally 100-year-old stuff. And you'd like to think that it's already been gone. It's not. it's still there. The bugs work their way in, eat a little bit here and there, but that contamination's still there, so. So yeah, that's the stuff we're working on. So I wouldn't suspect that if you had a situation like a fire, it would usually, you'd excavate that material out right away after that fire. You control the water from that, and then you wouldn't necessarily have a large tail in terms of like groundwater contamination or anything. So it's really some of the previous operations where they dug holes and buried stuff. That's how you get groundwater contamination.
So is there an example of something like this that's happened that, I mean, like, what's the cleanup time if that does happen?
Yeah, there's not a lot of examples.
Contamination part.
There's not too. I don't think there's been any fires with the lithium technology, lithium iron phosphate technology, the LFP technology in the U.S. I think these guys got a few other operations, and I don't believe there's been any concerns there. So.
Then I have one other quick question.
Yes.
Because you mentioned something about the decommissioning. Okay, so we're saying we're decommissioning in 20 years for a battery life. These are relatively new, 7 years.
Yeah.
Have any of these plants ever been decommissioned and that were out there? And
Yeah,
what are we basing this information off of?
That's a great question. I do not know the answer to that.
So the
Yeah.
decommissioning plan is also going to be part of what's reviewed by the Department of Homeland Security as well. So it's something that the town will be reviewing under the ordinance, but it's also something that the Department of Homeland Security reviews as well. So there's kind of multiple opportunities to understand what the costs are involved in that, and to make sure that those make sense based on, you know, other examples.
Does-
I wanted to ask you, you said that there would be no issue with the Little Cicero on the backside. Are they going to have like a barrier so that nothing from the plant goes into the dirt that way? Because they said it's on a cement pad.
Yeah,
Is that
so
correct?
this is if there was a fire or catastrophic incident.
If-
Runoff, I just want to make sure.
Anything from the battery storage facility that could run off into the river, is there like a wall or a dam or?
Yeah, so what they do when they do the design, like they would for even a subdivision, right? You have to have some stormwater management. So you got to control runoff. That runoff would go into a ditch.
Oh.
Or a series of swales or drains, and then into a retention basin.
Okay,
It's a lined
not
retention basin.
Into the river.
And then there's an overflow on that, which eventually goes into the ditches and through that. So part of the process, you'd have to do some testing initially to make sure there wasn't any concerns. There shouldn't be on just the batteries themselves and everything. It's when there's a fire or something along those lines, that outlet has a gate valve. And that gate valve can be closed in the event of a fire so that any water is captured totally on site. Yep.
I see a question in the back. No?
So would you be okay if they built one in your backyard?
It's not quite my backyard, but yeah. You know what? I got underground storage tanks right around the corner from my house. I've got, all of us, there's factories around town, maybe not right here in Cicero, but in other parts of Indianapolis. So yeah, it's just part of modern living, I guess. We've got high tension wires that are zipping across that same area. There's underground pipelines carrying fuel through that same area and through the area around here. So, I'm comfortable with it. Yeah, that was a question you asked. So I'm just trying to be honest with you. Yep.
You mentioned that there's 4 wells, like drinking wells within a half a mile.
Correct.
And they're all over 100 feet.
Yep.
Ours is not in one of those houses, and I don't know, Walter's probably is not either. Ours is only 60 feet.
Okay.
Which
which houses are those?
216, just south of the runway.
Okay. Did you recently install them?
We just had a new pump replaced, so I know the depth of it. We just had it done last year.
Well, the pump could be at 60 feet, but the well records show that they're 100, because what happens, you got a big pile of sand, you got a big pile of clay, 60, 80 feet, and then you got sand and gravel down here. they install a screen down here. That water shoots up that screen to about 10 feet below grade. So that's a static water level, so it's pressurized. And then what they'll do is they usually don't put the well pump all the way to the bottom because it more easily fouls that way. They put the well pump in the middle of the casing. So if they replaced it at 60 feet, that's probably just the well pump to the casing. That's my guess based on typical well designs.
And you did say that you looked those up in the records. So
Yeah.
just for your guys' awareness, any well that's dug, they log all those wells, and that data's all available.
It's all available on DNR's website, so I encourage you guys, take a look at the DNR website. That's where we got our information from. So it's out there, it's mapped up, and it's got all the old well records. So. Where's he at? He must be right here.
And you believe everything is well below the clay layer?
Yes, yes. Most well drills will not install a well less than 50 feet anywhere, just because most people have septic systems also. And if you got a septic system, where your wastewater is going, you want to have some separation between that. So sometimes that's a local ordinance too, a requirement, that you have to have so much separation or setback between your septic and the groundwater.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, gotcha. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You're welcome to stick around if you want.
I'll stick around.
All right, you're welcome to go as well. All right, moving along to the next.
The next up will be David Hall of Integra Realty Resources. As the company's name suggests, they look at real estate valuation. They do appraisals. They also do market studies and look at impacts. We asked them to perform an analysis of what, if any, impact there would be from this project on real estate prices.
Good evening. My name is David Hall with Integra. Got just a quick
You have the, okay.
Okay. I've got some paper handouts as well. I'll try to read this for folks if it's not super readable there on the screen. Sure. Again, David Hall with Integra Realty Resources. As you know, we are an appraisal firm. We were retained by the council to do an independent analysis of residential property value impact. I've got about 7 or 8 slides tonight that will just give you a real quick overview, kind of hit some of the highlights. The report obviously contains much more detail, but I'll try to be relatively brief and just provide a summary of our findings and conclusions, and then be happy to answer any questions you might have. A little bit about our firm. So we are based in Indianapolis. We're the largest appraisal firm in the state of Indiana. Cover the state of Indiana exclusively. I've been working with Integra for approximately 20 years. Currently a managing director, licensed in the state of Indiana. Have designations through the Appraisal Institute, do quite a bit of expert witness work and testimony in court proceedings. We have done similar types of analyses for a wide variety of alternative energy products or projects. Wind energy, solar farms, also did some data centers. So very comfortable with this type of work. Felt like we had an abundance of really good data to use. I did inspect the project site as a part of our scope of work here. You know, one thing that I think makes appraisers a little bit unique, you'll see this here on our first slide, is that we are required by law to be independent, impartial, and objective. It's not just a good idea, it's something that we are legally required to do. So for that reason, we take it really seriously. We're bound by certain legal and ethical requirements, need to be competent, have the requisite experience, education, licensing. We're required to perform assignments without bias. Conclusions cannot be predetermined. And then obviously, we're always seeking credible results. We cannot be misleading, fraudulent, or negligent. So with all that said, that sort of governed our scope of work and our approach to this assignment. Generally speaking, I think we felt at the start of this that the best way to forecast the impact from a valuation perspective or property value perspective of this particular project was to measure the impact of other best projects on surrounding residential properties. So that's a part of our first analysis. You will see in our report that we did 3 distinct analyses. This is the first, in which we're analyzing the impact of other projects on surrounding residential properties. Some of the considerations for our research methods and data selection include data relevance, data quality, quantity, and transparency. One note about transparency, I will say, in a previous professional life, I was a county planner, was for 5 years, worked for Monroe County and Zoning Administration, did the same thing for the City of Columbus, Ohio. I sort of sat on your side of the table many years ago as a staff member, so I do appreciate that something like this is of concern to residents. So part of what we wanted to do was to try and be as transparent as possible, not just with our methodology, but with the data itself. So you'll see in our report, we analyzed a data set of 100 homes. You'll see the address in there for every home, various data points about value, square footage of the home. All of that documentation, as well as everything else that we used to develop our report, was obtained from publicly available sources. So that means anyone can check our work. So I felt that was important to do in this particular assignment. We did use Zillow for part of our analysis. We think there are a couple good reasons to do that. Certainly if we're looking at home values. One of the reasons is it's the largest and most widely used real estate database in the U.S. Approximately 80% of U.S. home transactions involve agents who rely on Zillow's products. Approximately 2/3 of U.S. home buyers use Zillow's websites and apps. Zillow's Zestimates, their proprietary valuation tool, are derived from actual sale prices, MLS, multiple listing service data, and agent-submitted transaction data. Zillow has a low median error rate, and it's widely used in economic research by the Federal Reserve. Zillow's website is publicly accessible, so anyone can check it and look at it and use it. Most homes can be analyzed. Zillow has very broad market coverage. Value change can be measured uniformly over a period of time. That's what we've done here. Zillow also allows for direct comparison with benchmarks, and specifically their Zillow Home Value Index, which is sort of a broad market average indicator, and that was really our benchmark for this first analysis. We selected a total of 5 best projects around the country. Used a variety of criteria to select those. I won't belabor it, but you'll see that in a report, the specific criteria that we used to try and find projects that would be comparable to what's proposed here in Cicero. We then analyzed value change for surrounding homes. Proximity was a factor. Typically, in our process, we will start with the closest home to that best project and then sort of work outward from there. Again, we've got 5 projects that we analyzed, 20 homes surrounding each of these for a total count or total data set of 100 homes. We then compare the rates of value change for those homes to the local benchmarks. And again, that would be that Zillow Home Value Index. This chart here summarizes the data and conclusions for these comparable projects. The first project was the Sierra Estrella Energy Storage Project. That one's in Arizona. Second was Superstition Energy Storage, also in Arizona. Chisholm Grid Energy Storage in Texas. Gambit Energy Storage, Cunningham Storage, those were the last 2. I believe those are also Texas projects. You'll see there we've got a couple of different metrics. The first is total value increase. So here we're measuring the total change in property value over a 5-year period between 2021, 2026. Rates vary a little bit for the surrounding homes. Then we've got the benchmark in there for that corresponding local market area. That's that Zillow Home Value Index that I mentioned. And then we also looked at the compound annual rate of increase for those same homes, and again, that same benchmark. Again, some variation here around each project. I'll skip ahead to the next page, which is the aggregate for the data set as a whole. So for that data set of 100 surrounding residential properties, total value increase between 2021 and 2026 was approximately 31%. Benchmark for the local market areas was just slightly less at 28%. Compound annual rates of increase are very similar. For the surrounding residential properties, compound annual rate of increase over that 5-year span was 5.4%. Benchmark for the market areas was 5.0%. A few things to note just about our data set of 100 homes. The distances to the best projects, we used Google Maps and Google Earth aerial photos. They're little measurement tools to confirm distance. Range was anywhere from 300 to 5,000 feet. Most fell within that 1,000 to 3,000 foot range. Home values varied quite a bit. The least expensive was $103,400. That's the Zillow's estimate as of 2026. The most expensive was $1,400,000. Home sizes also varied quite a bit. Smallest home was 945 square feet. The largest was almost 5,000. Second analysis. I would say this is less persuasive, but the reason we did this is, one, it gives us a point of comparison. Essentially, we're looking at a best project that would be connected to the grid. We don't really have, at this point, a whole lot of best projects in Indiana to look at. It's fairly new to the state of Indiana. So didn't have sufficient data really to do this sort of analysis in Indiana. But we do know that there are some similarities between a BESS and what I would consider to be sort of an expansion of an electrical substation. Again, both intended to improve the capacity or efficiency of the grid, their electrical infrastructure. So we looked at those types of projects around 4 substations in Indiana. The AEP South Bend substation, the Duke Energy Francis Creek substation, the NIPSCO Cherryville substation, and the Indiana-Michigan Power Adams Road substation. Very similar methodology here. Data sets of surrounding residential properties. Again, we're looking at a span of time that would begin before the project was complete and then end well after completion. So if there is in fact some sort of impact, you would expect it to appear at some point within this 5-year window. Got data here for each of the projects. Again, the corresponding benchmark. Not a lot of variation here. I'll flip again to the summary on the following page, which is our conclusion. Total rates of value increase for the homes surrounding those electrical projects in Indiana was 53%. Benchmark for the local market areas was also 53%. Compound annual rates of increase were also identical at 8.8% per year. Third analysis, this is really just a summary of some academic research that was completed about a year ago. It was a research project. The title of it is fairly long here. The impact of utility-scale battery energy storage system projects on property values in California, Massachusetts, and New York. And again, this was a 2025 research project. A couple things to note about this research, and one of the things we liked about it, very large in scale and scope. They looked at 178 utility-scale BESS projects located in those 3 states. All of those projects are in suburban locations near residential development. The capacity ranges from less than 1 megawatt to 200 megawatts, fairly broad range there. They all had operational starting dates between 2012 and 2023. One other thing I would note, they mentioned this in the study, is the reason they picked California, New York, and Massachusetts. Really 2 reasons. 1, they had an abundance of BESS projects. And 2, those particular BESS projects were located in areas where there were dense concentrations of residential development. They had 2 groups that they studied. Their treatment group consisted of homes that were less than 3/4 of a mile from a utility-scale BESS project. The control group was outside that radius, homes that were 3/4 of a mile to 1.5 miles from the same utility scale BEST project. And then they just simply looked to see if that there were discrepancies or significant differences between those two groups. Ideally trying to find out if proximity to that BEST had an impact on property value. Their conclusion was that homes near an operational utility scale BEST project did not experience significant price changes compared to homes farther from the same project. Last page here is just a summary of what you'll find in our report. Have an executive summary in the first few pages, our scope of work, our methodology, the data we looked at, that's summarized on pages 10 through 12. The assignment requirements that are applicable to this type of work are summarized on pages 13 through 15. We've got a brief summary of some of the best projects that are being undertaken and under completion right now in the state of Indiana, pages 17 through 19. Descriptions of this project on pages 20 through 26. Our first analysis of those comparable best projects around the country, pages 27 through 53. Our analysis of other electrical substation projects in Indiana, pages 54 through 75. And then that research paper I mentioned, we've got some discussion there, pages 76 and 77. I would be happy to answer any questions.
So I had a question, maybe just to make sure everyone else, the comparison that you went against was that market value of that same community. So you took the 100 versus the whole entire market value.
Correct.
That was a question I had for him, just to clarify, making sure that it was kind of on par.
Correct. Each of the 5 best projects that we looked at are located in different market areas. So we compared that set of surrounding homes around the best to that benchmark in that local market area.
And the reason you didn't do, I know the answer, I'm just going to ask, the reason you didn't use any in Indiana is?
Correct. At this point, at least at the time of this report, about a month or two ago, I think there were maybe 4 that were in various stages. Only 2, I think, were maybe just recently completed. Ideally, if you're measuring value change over time, you want more than maybe a month or 2 to look at, and ideally a data set that's more than a handful of properties. So.
I just wanted that out there. Thank you.
Yep, yeah, it was entirely based upon the quantity of data and how recent those projects are in the state of Indiana.
Would aesthetics make a difference for you regarding properties around it?
The aesthetics of the home itself?
Of the best site?
Oh, the best site? I mean, I would say we've got 5 projects in our analysis. That research project had 178. I don't know the details of all 178. I have seen the aerial photos and site plans for these particular 5 in our report. You'll see those aerial photos in there. I would say they look very typical, fairly routine setbacks or normal setbacks. There's some landscaping. Nothing that was too elaborate, though, that I saw. All of these projects, like this particular project, are in relatively, I would call it sort of suburban fringe locations where there's a mix of agricultural land, some lower density residential development, and then some clusters of existing residential subdivisions.
Okay.
Any other questions from council? No. Any questions from the audience? Kim?
Hey, what was the size of the 5 best facilities that you compared us to? Because ours is 200 megawatts.
Correct. Can I flip to my report? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so you know, these will be made available on the website.
Yep. We did disclose that in our report. I'll flip ahead. I know we've got the numbers. Sierra Estrella, that's our first. That's a 250 megawatt project. Second is the Superstition Energy Storage. That's a 90 megawatt project. The third is the Chisholm Grid Energy Storage System. That's 100 megawatts. Number 4 is Gambit Energy Storage. That's 100 megawatts. And the last is Cunningham Storage, that's 190 megawatts.
So there's only one that's really technically right around ours.
I mean, number
two.
Yeah, there's
250 and
I'm sorry,
190.
190 and 2, sorry, I missed.
Yeah.
And then my other question for you is, did you cross-check with the county records to verify that the last time those comp homes have sold? Because Zillow isn't reliable, this home has not sold recently. Right.
So, yeah, great question. So theoretically, right, another way you could do this sort of analysis would be what appraisers would call paired sales, where you have the sale and resale of the exact same property. In a perfect world, that can be good data. We always like to start with that to see if there's enough data out there. But one, the home has to sell twice. It also has to sell before and after the best project was completed, right, for doing this sort of analysis. We started down that road, and after analyzing the first three, I think we found a total of maybe 2 or 3 sales. That's just not enough to do kind of a robust study. The other thing that complicates that sometimes, I would say, for doing a paired sales analysis, as an appraiser, is you would have to be able to verify what other factors impacted those individual transaction prices. So if you're looking at 2 sales between 2 points in time, you would have to know and be able to verify with buyers and sellers, was the kitchen remodeled, was there any expansion, did they let the house go sort of fall apart? There are many, many factors, right, that can explain any one single sale price. So as a practical matter, that becomes really difficult to do. Part of the beauty, I think, with Zillow is that is in fact based upon real-world transaction prices, MLS listing data, real sale prices. We found that every one of these data sets, actual, not every property, but some of the sales did have prior sales. Not necessarily 2, but the data sets in there have actual sale prices in there. Verified from public records. And at least in our research, when we were looking at this, where you would see that little dot where that sale price was, the margin of error was pretty small. I think Zillow advertises a margin of error or median error rate of maybe 2 to 3%. Not perfect, but it's pretty close. The other good thing about Zillow is we're at least comparing apples with apples. So while anyone's estimate might be off on one particular house, we're still looking at the exact same source for all of those other homes. And we did see quite a bit of consistency within neighborhoods. Similar sized homes, built at the same time, same square footage. You'll see those estimates are right on top of each other. So we didn't see any evidence of any significant errors.
So I do have a question. David brought up the fact that there are essentially other utilities there, such as the pipeline, the transmission lines, and the substations that are there. If you were, let's say one of those were proposed, would you essentially, would it be pretty congruent with how you did this? I mean, pretty similar how you would do the study, and the effects, do you feel would basically be the same from one of those installations versus this?
Well, I would say that was part of the reason we did that secondary analysis of utility substation projects, just as sort of a hypothetical. If it was not a BESS, but maybe just the substation was expanded, would that give us a different result? It gives us sort of a point of comparison. Can't answer with respect to underground utility lines, but other types of electrical infrastructure, that's part of why we did that second analysis to try and capture that.
Gotcha. Thank you.
One other question, sorry. And
Sure.
these 5 other areas, are they growing like Hamilton County is growing?
Yes, all of these are in, I would call, again, sort of suburban fringe locations where there's a mix of agricultural land, growing residential development. There were, in fact, several of these where we saw some newer subdivisions being built. Ironically, we couldn't use that data because the homes were too new, so we couldn't get, estimates over a 5-year span of time. But there were some homes that had been built within the past 1-2 years that we had to just sort of skip past because we don't have a long enough period of time to track value for those. But we did see evidence of residential development occurring around existing BESS projects.
But with how fast Hamilton County is growing, these places you would say with your best guess that these would be very good to use as compatible to compare a house in Hamilton County?
At least one of the projects, maybe 2, the Arizona projects, I think, are in Maricopa County. That's a suburban Phoenix. Very big city, growing fast. I know we have another one that's in the Fort Worth metropolitan area, Fort Worth, Texas, very big. I can't say that I measured rates of development or growth change, but those are certainly very large metropolitan areas with a lot of growth.
I'm not going to provide the name of a realtor, but there's a local realtor that provided us, we didn't ask for this information, that went out on their own and did a little bit of research. And what they came back with, they actually looked in the Boise metro area, which we've done we just got this, I've done no research, which was mentioned to us that it's the same, if not faster paced with growth. And really, they're not seeing anything on what they are seeing at this time either. Now, how that's from a realtor perspective, it didn't go to the detail, the actual data, but that is another data point to take into consideration.
Other questions? No? Thank you very much.
Okay. I myself am data-driven, though, hard data, not what somebody thinks. I need empirical information to make
That's why I
decisions.
was asking if it was empirical information.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Apples to apples, as you said.
Yes, no, very good questions. So.
All right. Mr. Culp, next.
Yes, sir. The next is analysis of what the potential financial impact of this project would be. We have engaged Adam Sturwall of Barnes & Thornburg. He's an attorney who does a lot of financial and governmental finance work for Barnes & Thornburg and for municipal clients. And then Jason Semler, who is with Baker Tilly. Baker Tilly is the town's financial advisor. We asked them to analyze if there could be an impact on the town, if that'd be what that would be, and how we would have to address that situation.
Aaron, can you talk a little louder? I'm struggling to hear you over here.
Oh.
Good evening.
Hello.
As Aaron mentioned, Jason Semler with Baker Tilly, principal with Baker Tilly. We serve as the financial advisor, municipal advisor for the town. I've been before Baker Tilly, before we merged with Baker Tilly in 2019, I was with Umball. So that name may sound familiar to a lot of you, but I've worked with them for 26 years and have worked with the town in some type of capacity, either through bond issues or budgeting or through the redevelopment commission for almost 26 years as well. So we have been asked to put together some numbers for the town so you can kind of anticipate what type of property taxes that could be generated if the project comes to fruition. So kind of before I start, I want to give a little bit of history because I think this is important as we talk about the property taxes that could be paid. The majority of the investment that's being discussed is considered utility property. So somewhat different than manufacturing equipment that we're often used to for equipment like for the retail or restaurants or normal type of manufacturing that we're used to. That type of equipment is all self-assessed, called personal property. In Indiana, we've got what we call personal property, which is the equipment, and then we have real property, which is the land and the building. Equipment or personal property, that's typically self-assessed by the company itself, and they have to go through set depreciation scales that's set by the state of Indiana. It's kind of like your car. As soon as you buy a brand new car and take it off the lot, it depreciates. Same thing for manufacturing equipment. Once they buy it, install it, start using it, it depreciates over time. It's same thing for utility property, such as we're talking about here. And in Indiana, before SCA 1, before 2025 legislation, depending on the pool, the equipment could depreciate down to 15% or 30% or 10% or 5%, depending on what type of equipment. But in Indiana, for property tax purposes, that equipment can never depreciate or pay taxes less than 30% of cost. So it could go down and depreciate to 10 or 15%, but when they're doing their property tax calculations, they would pay no less than 30% of their cost. So you may have heard of what's called the 30% floor.
You said 30, right?
30, yeah, 30% floor. Utility property worked the same way, whether it's, batteries, solar, wind, any kind of utility property, Duke Energy, any of those properties had the same thing, except they could depreciate it down to zero for federal tax purposes. But they would, for Indiana property tax purposes, they would still be subject to the greater of the depreciated value or 30% of cost. And that was really to protect the tax base of the town and all the overlapping taxing districts. Well, in 2025, SCA 1's legislation changed all that. They eliminated the 30% floor. So manufacturing equipment, retail, restaurants, they could depreciate their equipment down to that 15% or 10% or 5%. But utility property, they could, in theory, depreciate their equipment down to zero. So that was one of the huge changes that occurred in SCA 1 in 2025. Now, in the legislation this year, 2026, they amended that for utility property. So not for manufacturing, they can still depreciate their equipment below 30%. But for utility property, now they are again subject to that 30% floor. So the law changed in 2025 to wipe out that 30% floor and gave a huge tax benefit to utility property. And then in 2026, they amended it again to put that 30% floor back in place. I think that's very important because if you see these schedules, I think you all have received these ahead of time. If not, I have copies. The second column here, based upon the information that we received from the company, they're looking at making a $200 million investment. They are planning on filing the equipment as utility property. So under the law as of 2025, they could potentially depreciate their equipment down to zero. So if you look at the assessed value, we're assuming that this, based upon the information received, would be built in 2028, assessed in 2029, and paying taxes in 2030. So you can see the assessment is about $64 million. Take that times the tax rate for the town of Cicero, and they'd be paying about $1,297,000 in property taxes. They also receive, because of the utility property, they are entitled to receive a credit in the first year of the investment. So that's why you see in 2031, even though there's some depreciation, you see a higher number of $96 million. Again, based upon the 2026 tax rate for Cicero, they'd pay about $1,946,000. And then again, as that equipment depreciates, you can see the assessment decreasing to $57 million, paying taxes about $1.1 million. The fourth year, depreciating further to $34 million, paying only $700,000 in taxes. And then in 2034, depreciating at $11.5 million to $233,000. And then by 2035, based upon this depreciation scale, they'd be paying potentially no taxes after the full depreciation of the equipment. Now that was the law in 2025. As I again said, and that's kind of when we first were approached by the town to run this analysis, and that's what we were looking at. But again, in 2026, they amended that to go back to the 30% floor. So that's where you see the right side of the schedule. And you can see the first 2 years, 64 million, 96 million, same as before. But you can see starting in 2032, that's when we would anticipate them hitting the 60 million or 30%. So again, they pay the higher of 30% of cost or the depreciated value. So by year 3, they'd hit that 30% of cost, and based upon the 2026 tax rate, would pay about $1,216,000. So you can see with no floor, over that 20-year period, they pay about $5.3 million in property taxes compared to what the law is now, and based upon the 2026 tax rate, they'd be paying approximately $25,142,000 in property taxes. Now, I know something that's been talked about, we talked about decommissioning agreement earlier. One of the things that has been talked about is an economic development agreement. And that's something that we strongly recommend because, as you can see, it's $1.2 million. Based upon current law, it's very likely the legislation could change next year, that could impact the amount of property taxes they could pay and the benefit to the town. So that's something I think, as you guys have talked about, I strongly recommend that you do have an economic development agreement in place to negotiate what those, property taxes could be, so it doesn't fall below a certain minimum. Because again, it's changed in the last 2 years. It's a good chance it could change again, and it may not be in our favor. So you want to do something to protect the town. Be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I was just going to confirm, so you ran this out for 20 years, so with the current change in law that brings the floor back, as long as those assets, assuming it's all of the assets, the 200 million, assuming those assets are operating beyond 20 years, then that
would continue.
Taxable value would continue as long as the assets operate, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
So the total investment's 200 million, correct? In that neighborhood?
Correct.
Questions? Questions?
What happens if you change the tax law again back to the 2025 terms in the future? Does that let them depreciate it down to nothing again?
It could, and that's why the town is talking about, if they decide to go forward, also going to an economic development agreement that would agree that they would, regardless of how the law changes, they would pay a minimum amount of property taxes, so to protect the town from something like that occurring.
They can do that? Good. And it doesn't cost homeowner property tax? It
No.
doesn't cost us anything?
No.
Got me.
Any other questions? No?
Is that a net benefit, or does it reduce residential property taxes?
With the new assessed value, it could reduce property taxes, yes, depending upon how the assessment is accounted for. It's added to the tax base, or it could be captured for TIF.
Question?
I can't see it.
Is that to go to the state, or is what is the calculation directly to the local municipality?
Well, the tax rate that this is made up of the town, the school, the county, library, maybe a township. So it's kind of based upon the respective tax rate of all the overlapping tax units. So unless the town decides to create a TIF area, which there's advantages to that, this revenue would go to help fund all of those budgets. But there's nothing that goes to the state, it would all stay here in the county.
Okay.
Additional questions? What did you just ask me?
No, I think Adam's got that.
Can I make sure I understand something correctly on that? Sorry. So 1 million in property taxes is equivalent to what, 200 homes paying $5,000 a year?
Yeah. I need a calculator to do math, but
I was just making sure I'm understanding kind of. Thank you.
yeah. I mean, you're looking at $60 million in assessed value. So you take how many houses that you would need to generate $60 million of assessed value. Be another way of looking at it as well.
Rhonda, do you remember what Cicero net assessed value is?
No.
Jacob, we had this discussion?
We did, I don't remember.
I have it actually.
Just as,
Very little.
Yeah, very little.
I have a number, I just don't want to be wrong.
It's like 800.
Yeah, the tax base of the town,
Net assessed value.
the tax base was the net assessed value is $492 million.
The town's 500 million, and I think the entire township's maybe $1 billion.
Yeah, we were close to 900 million or something. All of Jackson Township's between 900 and $1 billion.
Yeah,
assessed
Jackson
value.
Township's $1,063 million.
And we're right at 500 million? Okay. I mean, that gives you a little bit of a comparison.
Yeah. Part of the consideration there is I don't know the right word for it, but what's the parcel size that generates that versus what a parcel size required for a housing addition would be essentially. So,
Yeah, when you're thinking about, houses, especially with SCA 1, with all of the additional deductions and exemptions that homeowners will be getting, I mean, now houses are a couple $100,000. The gross, maybe, $300,000 or $400,000, but once you add on the deductions and exemptions, you're talking, a couple $100,000. So you'd have to number quite a few very large subdivision to equal this type of assessment.
Yeah, can I lean into that? Because I think this is correct. You tell me if I'm wrong. Our tax rate is 2.0276, so let's just call it 2, right? If it was residential, you couldn't just, to make it equitable, you couldn't just add 60 million in assessed value. You'd have to add 120 million to get the same amount of tax revenue, right? Because the residences would pay 1% max.
Yep.
This is a commercial property which would pay the full tax rate. So to get the same amount of revenue off of this, which pays 2%, you'd have to have double the assessed value in residential to get the same amount of revenue. Is that correct?
At least, probably.
At least, before the deductions and all
Yeah,
that.
with the exemptions, deductions, once SCA is once phased in 2031, you get like a 67% deduction on your home. So
at least double.
Yeah.
Thanks.
There would also be a lot of additional costs with residences.
Right,
That's $60 million worth of homes, of traffic on the street, as well as students in schools, and all the other impacts that population would have with it.
Question, because this is not in Cicero proper, correct?
That's correct.
To date, it is not.
Yeah.
So how do we guarantee that Cicero gets tax money? What are we doing?
They have agreed to, we are able to annex this, and they have said they would agree to be annexed if we decided to do this.
All the way from town to
Yes.
that property? So, okay.
Yes.
So it doesn't go to the county, it comes to the
That would be correct.
Okay.
And I do want to just elaborate more on the economic development agreement to make clear, the way I think of it is it would be a backstop. And so if we agreed to a minimum amount of income we would receive, the payments they would make, so that if the taxes were reduced, they would still have a floor.
Right.
And so that way, if that got changed overnight again to 0, we would still have that floor, so the town would still get those
I
payments.
just don't want the county commissioners to get their grubby little paws on this money. Because they're a bunch of crooks.
I don't think that's called for. I mean, it's,
I'm sorry.
But all of us are trying to do the right thing. So let's just keep it sane, please.
I want it to benefit Cicero.
Any other questions?
Well, I was wondering, how are we going to benefit from this facility besides property tax?
I'm going to talk here when
good.
we're done.
Okay.
Because I'm going to give you my complete perspective. You guys know, if you've been here, I like to talk. So
Yeah.
I'm going to give you my complete perspective.
Yeah. Right now, this is purely financial, but they are going to,
I'm listening, so I was.
sure.
It could be through the reduction in property taxes, or if they decide to TIF it area, then all that money would go to the town, and it can be used for capital projects or even some operating specifically for the town.
I'll walk through a little bit.
Pay down that sewer bill.
Who's going to use the electricity? Is it us, or is it going to go somewhere else, overseas? or
That's
something?
a question for
Okay.
IPA.
The electricity from the project remains in this area.
In Cicero?
In this area,
Not only Cicero, it includes Cicero, it includes all of Hamilton County, it includes the surrounding region. So the grid reliability specifically where the facility is operating, which in this case is right off State Route 19, here, and then emanates outwards.
So those are the start of those transmission lines, right? And wherever those transmission lines go, benefit.
That's correct, and the 345 kV transmission line, it is all in Hamilton County in this area here. It's serving ratepayers in the immediate area. There's no scenario where this power is somehow shipped out to somewhere farther away.
Okay.
So it is interesting. We, through research, I mean, I would have had no idea, but there's even, Dennis, you can tell them the website, there's websites that you can see. So through your daily use, your energy bills, what different companies buy energy for is up and down. And we've had another person from the community walk us through it as well. So it's very interesting. So the idea of this is in those high peaks, you discharge. Low peaks, when it's cheap, you charge back up, which makes sense.
You're essentially saying once they capture that energy in the battery, they've captured it at that rate.
I don't know about that, but you're minimizing the high peaks.
The grid operators that utilize our facility are shielding ratepayers from those high spikes in prices.
Gotcha.
So just to be very clear, IPA Power is not arbitraging energy prices. The energy that is from this facility is used by the transmission owner and operator, which in this case would be, for example, a local utility or an electric co-op.
How come last time you said it wasn't going to be used locally, it could be all the way switched? This could all go all the way to California. So now you're saying it's only
No
going to
one's
be used
ever said that.
localized? You said it can be sold back to the grid and go anywhere across the United States.
Well, no one has ever said that.
Yeah, last time.
Last time, that's what was implied, this was.
This is how energy storage works, and the electrons are utilized locally.
So so maybe,
Just checking.
so I want to clarify too, because I heard something similar, but I'm not sure if he heard the question correctly initially. Those 345 kV lines are used primarily to power this area?
That's correct.
Okay, so that, and some of that power, if there's excess, is sold elsewhere?
That's at the discretion of the utility, not by us.
Okay. Because I think I heard something similar as well, so. But, I mean, it is benefiting our area as well. So that power had nothing to do with them. We were speaking with other, I'll call them experts, and I had no idea power spikes and prices were all over the place, so it was interesting. Thank you for that information.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Adam Sturwald with Barnes and Thornburg. So, and the great news, the legislative changes actually make my world so much easier than we were anticipating. So, here with the new 30% floor, like Jason said, you can either pass that through or capture. If you do capture as a TIF and then have them sort of backstop that minimum dollar amount, because in addition to that, the interest rate or the tax rates could change, could fluctuate. This helps keep that sort of minimum floor. And then what you can do with, if you were to TIF it, you can do mainly any kind of construction project, any capital expenditures, just like your other TIFs, and then also police and fire expenditures as well. So you could pay for police capital expenditures, fire capital expenditures, or operating costs. So it's very, very flexible and can help the town from dipping into other costs as well, including sewer or any other utilities. You can kind of dispatch that money as needed.
Can you maybe give some examples of the way TIF dollars have been used and with some of the towns and counties you work with, whether it's infrastructure projects, quality of life, whatever? Maybe just give us a sampling of how you've seen communities use those dollars.
Oh yeah, so it's mainly all capital expenditure. So it can be quality of life projects from parks, trails, any other thing the community is interested in, to sewer, water, any other infrastructure that is needed. Roads, either roundabouts, major pothole filling, or improvements, expansions. And then I also see it a lot for public safety. So new fire trucks, right? Fire trucks are, expensive. Police vehicles, equipment. Seen everything from tornado sirens, really anything that the community wants, but you can't pay operating costs other than potentially fire and police.
So Rhonda, I'm going to put you on the spot. I mean, we have TIFs set up around town today, and we use those funds for capital. Can you just give an example of a few projects?
And we just recently purchased the property behind the Shell station. We finished Jackson Street. We used $400,000 of the TIF money to complete West Jackson Street. And probably a good portion will go to doing East Jackson Street. So it's great funds. We've made great use of them. So
Otherwise, you're looking at most likely either bonding for those projects, property taxes, or income tax, so it's back on the taxpayer at that point.
I'm guessing the Causeway was funded with some TIF dollars.
That was significant, if I remember right.
Just, we've done some great projects with TIF dollars, that's for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the final presentation we have tonight is going to be by Will Gardner of Taft Law. Will is an attorney with Taft Law. His practice encompasses environmental issues, as well as he's helped us with some zoning matters and other things.
Speak up a little bit, Aaron.
I'm sorry, I keep thinking I'm loud.
Just lean forward.
But he's worked with the town in the past on some matters involving environmental things. And Mr. Gardner was asked to look at the zoning ordinance for the PUD. There it goes. And based on that, to make recommendations and revisions. He has worked through that ordinance, and so he's going to explain the revisions in the revised ordinance.
Thanks, Aaron. Let me just pull this up. I have just a couple of slides, not too many. As Aaron said, my name is Will Gardner. I'm a partner at Taft. I'm chair of Taft's Environmental Practice Group, and worked with Mr. Culp on putting together the proposed ordinance related to the nickel plate reliability project. As part of that, we evaluated other ordinances and sample language kind of from across the country, looking at what others in Indiana have done, neighboring states, groups who have focused on these kind of projects, and really tried to take best practices from what we found in a number of different communities and incorporate that into the ordinance that we put together. So first, just some background. The proposed PUD, Plan Unit Development Ordinance, amends the Cicero zoning ordinance and zoning map to address this project. And it only applies to the real estate on which this project is going to take place. There's a 4-year window of time for construction of the project to occur, and it doesn't change the underlying zoning district, but it does allow the BEST project to be incorporated into the site. Importantly, we've talked earlier a lot about, concerns that the community had about fire safety issues, thermal runaway, those kind of issues. I think August Mack did a great job of talking about, from a due diligence perspective, what their view on that is. But we've also made sure to incorporate into the ordinance these fire safety standards that the project would have to be subject to. These fire safety standards are also part of Indiana Department of Homeland Security requirements, but we wanted to, again, from sort of belt and suspenders standpoint, incorporate them in the local ordinance as well. There are a number of development standards that are going to apply to the project under the proposed ordinance. There's landscaping requirements, screening, buffer requirements, fencing standards. That includes a 7-foot anti-climb security fence, large evergreen trees, and a berm, all to try to provide some visual buffer from folks who are passing by the property. There are signage standards that have to comply with fire safety regulations to properly label equipment for emergencies and things like that. And there are also requirements related to drainage, stormwater management, erosion control, and requiring that utilities have to conform to state and federal regulations. There are noise standards that are incorporated, vibration standards, glare standards, dark sky lighting standards. Again, the intention of all of these requirements is to, reduce the overall impact that this site would have on the community around it, to create more buffer and ensure that, to the extent feasible, there's minimal disruption to residents of the town. It would include compliance with environmental laws, communication laws, and as I mentioned earlier, these fire safety requirements are also incorporated in the ordinance. And importantly, the owner has to provide the town with a third-party audit that they have paid for that shows that the site is going to comply with these standards. There's an emergency response plan that has to be developed and provided to the fire department, and the owner also has to provide fire training to the department as well. We talked earlier about decommissioning, so I won't go into it in a lot of detail. A decommissioning plan is required as part of this project, and we tried to sort of go above and beyond what we thought that should include. It not only includes removal of all of the BESS equipment, disposal of all waste, but there's also a component that requires environmental testing of the site to ensure that after the project is done, if there is any residual contamination, that they would be responsible to remediate that. And the site would then be graded and revegetated. We talked earlier a little bit about financial assurance. That would have to be provided in the form of a bond or a letter of credit or other surety in an amount equal to 120% of decommissioning cost. So, we're trying to build in some conservatism in that budget by making it not just 100%, by making it 120% instead. There are significant insurance coverage requirements included in the ordinance, and the town and the fire department have to be named as additional insureds under those significant insurance policies. And there's also provisions requiring the BESS owner to indemnify the town for any losses arising from the BESS. In the event that there were any safety incidents at the facility, IPA would have to provide notice to the town related to that. But there's also provisions in the ordinance that the town can inspect the BESS at any time just by providing notice to the owner. Lastly, we thought it was important to build in some additional enforcement and remedies provisions. The town will give the owner notice if any alleged noncompliance occurs. And if it's an emergency situation, that's required to be addressed immediately. If it's of a non-emergency nature, then they're allowed 20 days to remedy the issue. There are then provisions for fines for violations that are left unaddressed, local permit revocation if necessary, and the ability to enforce the ordinance in court as well and seek other remedies through that. So overall, we feel like we've tried to take, again, best practices that we've seen in ordinances in other communities to ensure that there are layers of protection for the town with respect to the ordinance, and the town would be ultimately protected in the event if there's some incident that occurs. So I'll pause there, see if there's any questions from the council.
So noise is a pretty big concern. The hum, it's 55 dB decibels at the property line. That's what's in the PUD. 55 at the property line, 50 at a home. If it's found to be 55 at the home, that's when a $1,000 fine could be levied until action is taken and/or additional or pulling the permit is what I heard, correct?
Yeah, those are all remedies under the ordinance. I'm sure that if that were to occur, that they would remedy the situation before any permits would be dealt with. But there's also provisions in there related to testing for sound as well. So I think ideally that type of issue would get caught early on if there were any concerns related to it.
Right. I mean, that's one of the issues that's been brought up multiple times.
Yeah.
And me personally, it would drive me absolutely crazy too if I heard a hum. So
yeah, I understand.
Thank you for that.
And one thing I wanted to expand on, when we're talking about the 120% bond for the decommissioning, every 5 years that would be reevaluated and potentially the total amount of the bond increased based upon inflation or any other price pressures. That way we make certain that if this happened 30 years from now, the bond is keeping pace with what the cost would be.
That's a good point, Aaron. Yeah.
So when is that set and when does that bond go into place? As soon as they start construction? It didn't, I don't believe it says in the PUD.
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head. Aaron, do you remember the exact timing for it? I think it might have been in connection, well, I'd have to go back and check. I don't remember off the top of my head. Unless.
It would likely be in connection to issuing building permits, so they would be prior to the construction activities.
Yeah.
Okay. And how is that value set for decommissioning?
It's a third-party estimate that must be verified, so that it's not just a opinion from Michael Power, it's a third-party line item estimate.
Okay, those address my concerns, thank you. So at building permit time and estimated by a third party, and that's re-estimated every 5 years to be adjusted?
That's correct.
Okay.
And that amount is also subject to the town's reasonable review as well. So, we have an opportunity to review that and make sure that we're comfortable with it.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions?
Mr. Gardner?
Yes.
We also, the town has the ability to reasonably, have reasonable satisfaction in the type of surety, financial surety.
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
What happens if they go out of business in 5 years? Is that bond set at that amount?
So the
That
bond,
was met, like, put at that 5-year mark, or?
yeah, but keep in mind, it's also 120% of the decommissioning amount. So, I mean, the idea would be that, I suppose if there is any fluctuation and inflation that happens in between the time when the decommissioning amount is adjusted, that we would always be keeping a pace of that.
Other questions?
Thank you all.
Thank you. All right, that wraps up the segment of our findings from the third-party consulting firms. Is this where you want to talk?
Yeah. I wanted to take it. Are you guys able to hear me? I know my voice carries. So I wanted to take a few minutes and just talk about the impact, how things happen, and just some background on what goes into these decisions. Because these are very important decisions and affect us all. We're all citizens here. Everybody on this board wants to do the right thing for our community. So as you all know, and I heard somebody mention it a little bit ago with the wastewater cost increase, costs are rising in every aspect of town expenses. That's just the way it is. We just had to deal with the fire department insurance standards status change due to manpower, where the council approved significant investment to add additional resources and OT and fill-in to meet those ISO standards. Ultimately, what that means is that ensures that our insurance rates, our homeowners' insurance rates, stay the same, and there were thoughts that maybe even some insurance carriers would drop residents. So there are actions like that. Wastewater project was more expensive than initially expected from when it was initially discussed. So diligently working to minimize rate increases to the customers through that. And that's not because we wanted to have that wastewater improvement, those wastewater improvements. That was driven by IDEM. We've had non-compliances over many, many, many years, and the resolution to that was you have to, after we sunk substantial amounts of money in stopping infiltration, we had to create a plant. So it's those type of issues that drive these costs. Next up, actually, is we're discussing a water plant. So that's a significant investment that's looming out there. And when you have those significant investments, you also have rate increases, right? It has to be paid for by somewhere. So that's out there. So as it is our responsibility of the town council to manage those costs, and our priorities as elected officials is to minimize those cost increases to residents of the town. And we all take that very serious. I hope you guys all realize that. We work to keep costs down, and our utilities, I would say, are more competitive than most areas. The town over the years has done a good job with that. So based on that focus, town has several options on how to manage those costs. We either increase utility rates, provide less services, less fire support, less police support, so you decrease those services that we're generally accustomed to in Cicero, and make minimal improvements to the area. As I think it was discussed, our tax rates are fixed, so no opportunity to gain significant increases in tax revenue unless you do something. It's just the way it works. So this, this proposed project area in discussion, along State Road 19, it is currently zoned C3. So at some point in the past, it was decided that commercial would be along that pipeline or that road. Surrounding the area has the following: as you go from Noblesville towards Cicero, you have Green Cycle, you have an electrical substation, you have a natural gas gate regulator station, you have the 345 kilovolt high tension power lines, and you have a Marathon Petroleum pipeline dissecting this particular property. So based on that, this corridor already hosts regional scale utility infrastructure today. So based on that thought process and trying to maintain reasonable rates within our town, this location has the type of infrastructure in place. The U.S. needs facilities like this and financial benefit to the area. This project was worth investigating further. So I'm not leaning one way or the other with this. I'm just telling you the thought process that goes behind it. So please understand that. So, it deserves further investigation, which is what we've done. We've gone out and hired experts and are doing our due diligence. So that process leads us today where the council worked to ensure the impact of the proposal would have minimal impact to the surrounding area. This is why we requested outside experts, like I just mentioned, to provide guidance independent of IPA, ensuring a safe community is a standard that all of us up here feel has to be maintained. So there's a question we have to ask ourselves at this point. With all the information known and presented from the independent, unbiased experts, does this project fit the area? That's a question that has to be asked to all the council members making these decisions. Whether it's this project or another projects, we need to divest from our standard 1% tax rates that are taxed on homes, with some industry to help maintain expected living standards within the town. We talked about all the major projects above that we're having to deal with and all the costs associated with it. So these type of projects, unfortunately, are not just optional. They are required to some level we're required to maintain a safe, reliable services. So I guess another question that I'm asking is, what other projects are potential fits for this area if they were to come forward? High density housing, traffic, school impact, I think we